4th, 1980, the light trawler Bounties of Buckie was fishing for mackerel off the coast of Cornwall in the English Channel, capsized and 3 men lost their lives. One of them was Mrs. Jean Hillier's only son, Russell, aged 25. Later that year, Mrs. Hillier met with Mrs. Loban, who had lost her husband and son on the Buckie registered boat Corinthia, and Joey Bowie, who lost her son on the Bounteous. They discussed the possibility of finding somewhere in the town that it could be used as a memorial hall, somewhere they could go to, as they had no known grave apart from the sea to pay their respects for their loved ones. They set up a petition and went round the town and local villages asking for support, and very quickly had over 1,000 signatures. They then approached George Moray, skipper of the Manor, and at that time chairman of the local branch of the Scottish Whitefish Producers Association, asking for his help. George's son-in-law, Eddie Fimster, who was skipper of the Bounteous, had also lost his life in that tragedy. George then took this up at the first board meeting of the local branch of the Whitefish Producers Association, and intimated that he intended forming a committee to help the ladies with their project. The skipper of the Arius, Peter Slater, and the skipper of the Internaus, Sandy Sutherland, volunteered to join him. The first meeting of the committee was on the 9th of January 1981, held in a room in the Buckie North Church at 7:30 p.m. Chaired by George Moray. There were 10 present and 4 others co-opted to the board. Application was made to Grampian Regional Council for use of the room currently set aside for the use of retired fishermen above the Harbour Master's office as a memorial room. At the next meeting of the committee, Mrs. Jean Hillier was appointed vice chairperson, Reverend Fred Coots, secretary, and Gordon Taylor as treasurer. Mrs. Jean Hillier would convene a fundraising committee, and an approach was to be made to Sandy Wilson, an architect, for advice on decorating the room. At that meeting, a constitution was also to be drawn up. Then on the 14th August 1981, the committee visited this hall, owned by the congregation of the South and West Church, and which was being used at the time for collecting waste paper, and the committee approved of its suitability. On the 18th of September, George Sanderson announced the church's willingness to allow the use of the hall, conditional to there being no cost to the church funds, and rates, insurance and maintenance costs would be borne by the committee. The hall had been built towards the end of the 19th century by the Reverend Alexander Miller, minister of Buckie Free Church, and was used by the folk of the Seatown and Yardie for communion services, prayer meetings, youth work, and the like. Indeed, a certain Mrs. Ollie Cool, who was born in the Yardie and lives there today with her husband, tells us that her grandfather and grandmother were married in this hall in 1900. Sandy Wilson was now asked to prepare plans for the decoration, and these were accepted. He, along with George Moray, then went to Herdeman Kenzie's shipyard to talk to Johnny Mackenzie, telling Johnny about their project. Johnny agreed to what they'd asked for, and said he said he was delighted to do it, and he appointed his best joiners to go ahead and make the board that Sandy Wilson had designed. At the same time, we spoke to Sammy Buckie, who had a jeweller's business in the town, to look into getting blocks to put on the board. And Sandy Buckie did this. Then Mr. Florence, the principal arts teacher at Buckie High School, was then asked to prepare sketches for the windows. It was decided then that the description on the board would read, "In the memory of those who lost their lives at sea." Now you will notice in the board that along the top, the big plaques all stand for a fishing vessel that went down with all hands. You'll notice too that, for example, the Carlisle was 1969, the Florida Gardenstone 1968, the Sapphire at Burghead 1977. That's all happened before the Bounteous was lost. And it was only after the loss of the Bounteous that this all started, came to life, and we've ended up today with this magnificent board made by Edward Mackenzie, and with these blocks that Sammy Buckie made for us. Fireplace was removed and alterations began. Mr. Florence showed sketches of his work and Scott said costs would amount to around £300 each. He was told to go ahead. His designs graphically depict the theme of the sea, fishing, and the later work of the local community. And if you look closely, a biblical theme runs through most of them. An opening date was set for 4th of July 1982, a Sunday. This communion table here was gifted by a church in Rothes. What we have before us today would never have been possible without the hard work of the Ladies' Committee in fundraising, for funds were needed. In the generous gifts given from different associations, from businessmen, from tradesmen, and from people in general. We can never underestimate the leadership given by George Moray and Mrs. Jean Hillier, the work done by Sandy Wilson in planning and overseeing the work in the building, Mr. Charles Florence for his marvellous windows, and to the committee as a whole during those 18 months prior to the opening. Mrs. Jean Hillier opened the hall on Sunday the 4th of July 1982, and on Monday the 4th of July the Queen and Prince Philip paid a visit. Owing to bad health, George Moray had to stand down as chairman, and at the AGM in 1986, Peter Slater was appointed chairman and Sandy Sutherland as vice chairman. In November 1994, Peter Slater had to stand down as chairman, and Sandy Sutherland was elected chairman. His vice chairman was James Slater, Peter's son. Today, John Smith is his chairman, with Beryl Murray his vice chairperson. From the beginning, a decision was made that for names to put on the board it needed an next of kin's approval. The names date back to 1945. Although named sometimes Buckie Seaman's Memorial, Seaman from Nairn and east to Gardenstown are included. There is a book of remembrance on the table here for those lost at sea prior to 1945. Although the boats today are much safer, nevertheless fishing is still a dangerous occupation. There are over 170 names on that board. The Memorial Hall represents the same today as it did when it was opened in July 1982. I have only mentioned a few people in this address, but others, too numerous to mention, played an active part in getting this building up to what it is today.